Two friends, Alan Dale and Jerry Carew, who grew up just a few streets apart in St. John's East End, have been separated by Canada's geography for 3 decades. They came together virtually during the pandemic to chat about like-minded interests. Alan lives in PEI and Jerry in Newfoundland. Thriving in remoteness has been a common theme for both of them during the pandemic. Gale Force wins. The podcast is the result.
We're excited to be back in a conversation again. How are you today, Jerry?
I'm doing really well, Alan.
Today we're going to start our journey in the Dinaric Alps. We're going to go to a beautiful city, multicultural city of Sarajevo. The year is 1992 and it's the 3rd of April. We're very excited to talk to our next guest, Dr. Budimka Oroz, and she's going to tell us a little bit about the 3rd of April, 1992. And then we're going to take a journey. We're going to take a journey through Sarajevo, through Serbia, into Canada, and we're going to have a wonderful conversation. Budimka, welcome to the show. It's a real pleasure to have you.
Good morning, Alan. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Budimka, 3rd of April, 1992. A lot of things are brewing in the former Yugoslavia, all around you in Croatia and Serbia, Montenegro. Everything is churning up. But life in Sarajevo is still pretty good. You've got old men playing chess in the city square, people drinking espresso. It's a beautiful place. Tell me about that day. Let's start right there in that time and space. And let's go on a journey north, south, east, and west of that.
Yeah. April 3rd, early morning. We had our oldest was 8 months old at that moment. Mladen, my husband, just came back from the business trip in Germany. Early that morning, 4 o'clock arrived. The war is everywhere, as you said, in Croatia, in the northern Bosnia, but 500,000 people in Sarajevo in complete denial. It will never come to Sarajevo. It can't. It's just impossible. We managed to live with so many differences for 50, 60 years, and differences didn't matter to us at all. So exactly, we were living as life was the perfectly normal. So perspective, 8 o'clock in the morning or around 8 o'clock, early coffee, a map holding the baby, looking around through the big window. We live in the new part of the city of Sarajevo, just across the TV station. And I look at through the window. Early April is already blown spring back there. So nice sunny morning, and I look at through the window and I saw the sight that I never seen before. It was a soldier in a blue uniform. Now, it's a peace, no fighting. And there were 2 of them, actually. One of them was African American. Now, very unusual sight. Yugoslavian army had gray, green, olive uniform, and this was blue. Yes, we knew who is blue, who had a blue uniform, but why were they in Sarajevo? There was no war. So holding baby, I turned to my husband and I said, well, come see this. And he came above me, over my shoulder, and he looked at that and he said, start packing and do it fast. And I go into a denial mode. No, nobody's going to kick me out of this. This is my home. This is place. So it took him a good hour to try to convince me to start thinking of that. And now when I look back, actually, I remember seeing a panic in his eyes, but he didn't want to convey that to me. Anyway, my father came for unusually early for visit because he was a high school teacher, came to his school. School was closed. They just send them back home. So he stopped by. Mladen pulled him out and said, hey, we gotta do something. She doesn't want to leave. So my dad said, you know what? Something's going on. Pack for 2 weeks. When you come back, it cannot take more than 2 weeks. And then I did. It was 8 o'clock when we saw that site. We left at 11:15. And that's 3 hours and 15 minutes. Again, the things, when somebody said, what's a fate, what's a destiny, you don't believe in that because you don't get to the hard moment in life. And then you get to one and you actually realize that things play in a strange way. For us was in a very good way, because it happened that Mladen's cousin was leaving for business trip to Belgrade and basically just came and picked us up. And we drove through Bosnia, through the war zone. But again, we were lucky enough not to feel anything for 3-4 hours driving to Bosnia to get to Serbia.
So, Budimka, I've taken that trip from Sarajevo. I've driven that road. It's a windy road, mountainous, single lane.
That's right.
What was it like? What was that journey like that day, knowing that? And of course, in the back of your mind, you think, again, I'm sure you're thinking, okay, nothing can really happen here, because Sarajevo, as you so rightly point out, it's everybody's living peacefully together. Jewish, Muslims, Christians, Orthodox, everybody is living peacefully in this beautiful little city. And so here you are now, you're in this car, you're driving through these mountainous roads. Tell us a little bit about what that was like. What were you thinking?
So there is one main road you can leave Sarajevo to go to any direction. And that road was blocked that morning by I don't know whom. So we couldn't leave that way. Just a little couple of things. So we're leaving the place, and I'm going for 2 weeks vacation. That's in my mind. And there is Mladen's mom crying, saying goodbye to us. And I was at that moment late 20s. I was graduated medical doctor. I wasn't a kid. I was an adult with baby. And I thought, why is she crying? Why is she crying? And I just could not get out of my mind, well, why? We coming back in 2 weeks? Little we knew that I'm going to come back in 4 years after that. And then we couldn't even stop at the bank to take money. So we had 600 German marks in the house, in the apartment. That's what we left with, and no chance to take any money. So we had to go some very, very unknown to me roads, smaller roads. And the entire road, as you pointed, windy and forest, and you never know, again, it's unknown, and no one on the road, just us. Wow. At one point there was another, I think it was a red car, and we clearly see it's a family, 2 small children in the back and 2 adults in the front, and they were following us all the way. And it was for the safety of both, I guess. At that moment we didn't know, but one car alone, anything can happen. When there is a witness, then it's not as easy. So we drove about 4 hours and never stopped, never. And you know what, not from the fear, from unknown, from uncertain, from what's going on, from I remember at some point Mladen and his cousin were talking about things like, if we only pass this point, and if we only pass this point, then I'm like, what points? What? But I guess from the news, or they knew the demographic of the Bosnia, they knew what could be there and what could be there. So me holding 8-month-old baby, with some fear, with some unknown, hoping to cross the river Drina, which we did. So we passed, that's a border between Bosnia and Serbia. At the time, wasn't border at all. Now it's a border between 2 countries. But we passed the bridge, and after driving for 4 hours, stopped at the first restaurant or something like that. So again, as I said, it's early spring. We sat outside in the outside table, and there was a waitress who came, and there is a differences in the same language, but differences in accent. So when she heard us talking in a Bosnian accent, she said to us, "Oh, kids, you are refugees too." And all of us just stood and like, "No, we are not." She said, "Oh my gosh, you are thousands since this morning coming." People were running. So the waitress told us that we were refugees. We didn't know before that, and she was right.
Right.
She was right. Yeah.
Tell us, so the River Drina is where exactly? Just kind of geographically situate the audience. And I think the River Drina, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a very famous
Yeah.
actor has named his daughter, right?
Uh, uh, Robert De Niro. Yeah.
Robert De Niro, right?
And the River Drina, it's a book that won the Nobel Prize,
Right.
written by Ivo Andrić, the famous Bosnian writer. So yeah, River Drina. Drina is river between Bosnia and Serbia. So eastern border of Bosnia, western to Serbia, and it's almost the entire border between the two countries now.
So you cross that river on the bridge. What's facing you on the other side? Where does life immediately take you from there?
Well, relief, because there was no war in Serbia at that moment. So it's kind of, we made it, but that's it. Then everything unknown comes up again. The entire screen in front of you is, what now? So Mladen had a family in Belgrade. That's where we stay for about, not sure, 4 to 6 weeks. And then soon after I got a job. So we moved in a bit southern, maybe hour and a half driving south from Belgrade city in Serbia, where I was work as a rural GP. And with that rural, which was just a lucky event, we got the house for free.
Okay.
It belonged actually to a few communities to build a house for the doctor who's willing to come and practice in the, covering. It's very big villages, but very close to the center. Like it's a 5 kilometers drive. They already call it rural.
Right.
So yeah, we came there, and then soon 3 of my sisters joined us as refugees. So good, we got that house to have a place for everyone.
Right.
And that's where we stay about 10 months.
Okay. So then you're practicing medicine in this rural area, which by the way is a great idea for those communities to offer a house to the physician. This could be a great model for Canadian rural communities to replicate at the moment, because they're struggling. So you're practicing medicine in this rural community, and one by one you take your sisters in and you provide them shelter. What happens next? How does Canada come on the radar screen?
So Canada was always something for us special. And I think it was actually through that United Nations peace forces. There was always some connection between, because Yugoslavian army was also involved in peacekeeping. And there, I can't even remember any particular event, but that Canada as a peacekeeper was connected always.
Right.
So living in Serbia, just 2 sentences. Serbia was not in the war, but Serbia was punished for the war, punished.
Right.
Economically, the world put a sanction, and the life was just crazy. So perspective, you get your paycheck in the morning, and let's say, just perspective, you can buy groceries for the entire month. If you don't do that morning, by the afternoon, your paycheck is worth 1 roll of toilet paper. That's how inflation was. They said it's worst inflation ever recorded in the world. Wow. So life, there was no war, no fighting, but you know what? It's hard. So even your work, and I think we were in a better situation than many, not paying rent or mortgage or anything, just for food. It was hard. And then Mladen started just, he said, I want to go, and I want to go far. This is not for me. I don't want to be part of any of this. And he was right, possibly the best decision we made. He started applying in a Canadian embassy in Belgrade. And then apparently that's how it goes. When you apply as a refugee, there's a certain number of people Canada takes every year as refugees. But that quota was, filled by February of that year. And it was August when he started applying. So they offer, the only way is to wait till next year and no guarantees, or apply as a different status, landed immigrant, which means you pay for the procedure, you pay for the process, for the fees, for your ticket. And when you come to Canada, you have no social support, because you're not that way, not as a refugee, but they ask you if you have money, and we did have, but that money went for tickets and for the,
Right.
so we came with this very, very small leftover. Came to Canadian embassy for interview, a great experience. At the end, when the consul said, "Welcome to Canada, bienvenue au Canada," we said, "Okay, but what about my sister?" The youngest sister, 15 years old, was with us, and our choice was, when we leave to Canada, she's gonna go back to Bosnia. That was for sure, because I didn't have family in Serbia. So send 15 years old back to the war, and it was the strongest time of war fighting. So we said it in our not broken but impossible English to the Canadian consul, and he understood. I don't know how. That's again the fate. And he said, "No, I'm not going to allow that." So he speed up the process of getting her. Within 2 months, she got the visa, and she came with us.
Wow.
That's it.
Jerry, now I've got the benefit of, Budimka's going to find this funny, but I've got the benefit of hearing a lot of this story before. And the reason is I lived in Ottawa, and I lived in a neighborhood, we talked about this before, where everybody lived really close together and nobody spoke to each other in this neighborhood. And I couldn't tolerate that. So at the time that I moved in, I organized an event for about 75 people around me, the closest homes to us. And I wanted everybody to tell their story so we could get to know one another. So Budimka and her husband Mladen told me this story that night in my basement in Ottawa. And I was so moved by it, which I am even now, that my wife and I packed up our bags and went with Budimka and Mladen to Sarajevo. And we did that drive with them, just to relive that experience, just how powerful it was. Now, because I went through that whole process with Budimka, and I got to know Mladen very well. And for Mladen to say he's leaving that part of the world is a huge decision, because we'll get to meet Mladen in another interview in the fullness of time, and you'll see his passion for his country. But that's a huge decision that Mladen had to make. And I wanted to inject that before we move any further, because it seems like such an easy thing to do. But I can tell you, knowing Mladen as I do and knowing Budimka as I do, that was a very, very tough decision. And as we also go on this interview series, we intend to interview Sarah and Isadora, who are the daughters of Budimka and Mladen. And you'll see from them where they get their strength. You'll see in this interview where Isadora and Sarah get their strength. They're just like their mom. Okay, so Jerry, any questions before we get into Canada and our next part of our journey?
I just taken a deep breath, frankly, because Budimka, you've taken me on quite a journey. I have never listened to anyone tell a story like that in my entire life. You know, in university, I had the benefit of actually going to university with a young man from Malaysia. I'll never forget the day he stood on my mom's steps and stared out over the city of St. John's, population 200,000. And he said to me, he said, "Jerry, you are so wealthy." And frankly, my mom was a single mom. Dad had been dead now 25 years. I didn't feel wealthy. What I didn't understand, and he brought me perspective, was, and he said, in Malaysia, there's so many people just tightly packed. So your story brought that back to me. What I think the benefit of you being in Canada is, I think every lucky person in terms of being born in Canada needs to be reminded of how lucky they are. I'd just like you to talk a little bit about that, maybe, you know, in terms of what you've experienced, and I guess how you handle if someone living here is not living up to their potential, because I think the benefit of having someone like your family here, having been through what you've been through, you know, I've had a pretty easy life in comparison.
You're right. Even though I can say that life before the war in Bosnia was easy, And that's another interview, Alan, I'm sure. But, um, uh, we lived very decent life. We were not rich and not going about economic or anything, but we had what we needed. Country was well organized, European country with everything in place, education, medical, dental, all laid up, paid. We didn't worry about mortgages, insurances. Now I'm talking about 80s and 70s, and could be difference here too at that time. But we really lived for now. You make your paycheck and you're gonna spend it. You're gonna not put it in, for the mortgage and pay off this and this. So easy, relaxed way. And us, our generation, and I just realized we are baby boomers. I didn't know the baby boomers go to 1965. That was a blow. But now our generation, I think we picked up the best part of Yugoslavia. If you ask my parents, they wouldn't have the same story because they lived 50s and 60s, but then 70s, 80s were different. So life was well and set and peaceful and opportunities, and we could travel, we could go for holidays, and all of that stopped on that April 3rd. And that, I think, it's a tragedy of us coming from either part of former Yugoslavia, Croatia or Bosnia, is because that's where the most of the war took place, is that everything stopped in a second, in an hour. For us was 2 hours and 3 hours and 15 minutes. And that's the hardest part. When you immigrating, when you choose to leave, when you choose to go somewhere, you make a process, and as you do that, you're doing the closures. That's it. You have time to say goodbye at the end to everyone. And for us was no time to do anything but just leave, and leave to unknown. And the same happened when we applied to, and even we wanted to come to Canada and got visa. It was unknown.
Right.
Completely. Now more unknown. As I said, my English was next to zero. Mladen, as a guitar player, knew lots of love words from Beatles songs. So we were very friendly talking English. But then you come to not knowing language, not knowing culture, not knowing tradition, and no family,
Right.
No one to support.
So Mladen knew every Fleetwood Mac song.
Everyone.
So Budimka, wonderful. You have this uplifting experience with the Canadian Embassy. They get what you're trying to do. So what happens then? You jump on a plane. Let's talk about that. You get on a plane. What now?
Yep. So just one thing. And I'm still, to this date, I'm not sure what piece of paper I signed in Canadian Embassy, but as a guarantee that for me to practice medicine in Canada, I will have to go through the process. I had to sign some piece of paper that I'm not going to practice as an MD until, and I don't, again, please understand, I didn't know many of the things I was doing at that time. Right. So in my London immigrant visa, Canadian London immigrant visa, the occupation was new labor. So, and who cares? And you think I knew what that means? No. So we got a ticket to leave Serbia at that time. Was really hard because the country was under all kind of embargoes. Was no regular flights, regular bus routes, regular trains, no. So it was all very small, organized through the tourist agencies, small mini bus leaving to Budapest, going through the worst storm of the century. That was early March. So from Budapest to Amsterdam, the customs or whatever doesn't want to let us go through because we had a passport of Yugoslavia, and Yugoslavia was not existing country. But there was a Canadian visa, independent London immigrant for forever. So we had a trouble to get through that, and I don't know how it. And I didn't understand again, but we did after an hour. I think the plane was waiting for an hour. It was KLM flight. We were entering the plane, was already boarded. And then the few flight attendants looked at us. I was holding Sarah, who was 17 months old at that time. And they look at her, cute little kid, and they said to us, no, you're not going that way from here. So they put us in the first class.
Oh, wow.
What a way, what a way to start new life. So we did, I guess they have a space, and we flew Amsterdam, Vancouver.
So you arrive in Vancouver, beautiful Canadian city. Everything is in Vancouver, but you don't wind up in Vancouver. Where do you go next?
No, yeah, because of a family member who actually helped in the process as we were applying as a London immigrant. Distant cousin, my father's cousin, she lived in Prince George, BC. So that was our destination. Made sense because she was helping down the process, and that's where we lost the flight to Prince George because our plane was late. Anyway, so when you come to Canada, what's Canada for all of us? Cold. So we went through the worst storm of the century from Serbia, all dressed in a heavy winter coats and boots and everything. Landed in Vancouver. Spring.
Spring, yeah.
People were rollerblading in the shorts, and I said to Mother, you know what? I think we boarded the wrong plane. This is Los Angeles.
This can't be Canada.
And that was the first. That was a positive, but that was shocking. And I truly believed for a little while that this is not where we wanted to come. This is not Vancouver. So we lost a plane to Prince George, had to spend a day in Vancouver, and then boarded a bus, direct line Vancouver, Prince George. And thankfully the bus was night ride.
Right.
Because we didn't know how far and where we're going and through what we are driving. And came early morning, 6 o'clock in Prince George, and that's the new life. And everything, the life we knew it was over. That's the new life, new chapter.
Budimka, even traveling with an 18-month-old is challenging enough, right?
A 15-year-old teenager.
Right, and a 15-year-old teenager, right?
And Mother and I, by evolution, we were not ready to have a teenagers. We were parents of a first child baby, so now it's a teenager that is challenging as, if not more, than the baby. But
so, what do you do? And do you immediately start practicing medicine in Prince George, or?
Yeah. No. First of all, English was the obstacle. Second of all, Prince George is a small community, 70,000 people, and I don't think at that point they had a lots of immigration. And the immigration office in Prince George was kind of learning with us. We were told a few times, what are you doing here? Go up north and practice medicine. We need doctors there. So obviously they didn't know there is a process that I cannot do it, and I would like to, but
right.
No. So lots of, for us, learning the system, I think they also, as the first immigrants of this Bosnian war, of the war of 90s in that small community, they were kind of learning with us. So no, I couldn't work because of the regulation. I couldn't work because I didn't speak English, and that's where everything stops. So learning English, going to classes organized through immigration. What's the called? Immigration services in Prince George. Meeting people from all over the world. And that's a first, and that's also very, very positive. Remember that very much. When I said multicultural services, yeah, thanks. When you meet people from everywhere, from China, from India, from Malaysia, from, Croatia. So you sit in the same room and you just fine. And for us, that was normal. For us was the way how we were accepting always people. And then we had one vacuumed space when things stop. And now all over again, we are socializing with differences, and we are accepting it.
Incredible journey. Budimka, you find yourself coming across Canada, you settle in, you're in Ottawa now. two wonderful children, Sarah and Isadora. Tell us a little bit about them and their journey. We're going to talk to them in the fullness of time, but from your perspective, tell us about how all of this would have affected them. One, of course, not even born at this point, and the other just very, very young.
Sarah was 18 or 19 months old when we came to Prince George. At that time, kids start speaking few words of, expected 20 words of to know to say. And then we started the English school, and she needed to be babysat by a person who is English speaking, not a word of Serbian language. So that after a few days, we realized she completely stopped talking in any language. She got so confused because the few words she knew did not do anything for her baby, but she didn't know the new words. So she was 2-3 months to the point of being concerned, no word spoken. And then when she started speaking again, it was English.
Right.
So that's the example that our kids don't speak the mother language, they speak whatever first language, and that's how it goes. Right. English for both of our kids is a first language. And then Isidora was born in 95 in Prince George. To this date, she still wants to go back and visit the place she was born. She never did until we left. After we left in 98, we never went back. And she will. She said that's the first thing to do on the bucket list. Yeah. So we very soon, with knowing some language, learning more, we actually got good paid jobs, both of us, and life picked up financially. It was okay. But after a few years, again, thanks to Mladen, he said, you know what, this is the maximum potential we can get here. We need to do something. In 98, we made a decision to move to Ottawa. And that's where actually was great. I did all my exams here, and both of us had jobs, not in a profession, but we're much fulfilling than the previous. And then in 2004, after 6 years of applying to get matched for the residency, and all exams done. I think even I had a couple of exams ahead of a Canadian graduate. I got the residency for family medicine in Regina, Saskatchewan, where we moved in 2004, and then after 4 years, returned to Ottawa.
Wow.
You've been more places in Canada than most Canadians.
So yeah, 3 provinces, Ontario twice. Well, we have more plans, but hold on that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. There's a big catch at the end. So Isadora, go ahead. Now you started to talk about Isadora.
Isadora, born in 95. Isadora, very interesting. She was like that even as a kid, very open, very forward-going child, difficult teenager, but very, and but at one point, and I remember as we were talking, a few things I mentioned in all of this, in a life you go through, and many things you don't even remember, or maybe if you do, they not in a context, but a few things that I mentioned, they come as a flashback in a good way, and one of those good flashback moments was Isidora, at the age of 17, decided not to even socialize with us because we were too old and too boring, and whatever.
We can't relate to that, Alan, can we?
And she came out of her room. It was Saturday morning. I had a coffee. She came to me and she said, very, very not friendly. She said, I know what I want to do in my life. And I'm like, okay, you have to be, you have to stay positive and listen. And I said, sure, what do you want to be? She said, I want to be a doctor. Well, I tried to not laugh, and I didn't. And since that moment, when she put the goal in her head, she focused to it. She ended up being a doctor, but that's a type of a child that's a personality we dealt with. She wanted to do it, and she wanted to do it on her terms, and doesn't have to be easy way. Even if it's a harder way, it's her way.
Yeah,
Okay.
I remember around that time, if she was in grade 11 or grade 12, she met with one of her teachers and said, okay, I need a certain mark, and said to the teacher, how are we going to achieve this? As if to say to the teacher, you've got as much stake in this as me. So, but Sarah the same way, very kind of focused on what they want to do. And Sarah's a doctor as well.
See, she's a doctor of psychology. Yes, Sarah is in the same way, but in quietly.
Right.
And I think that's her profession fit her so much. She'll do it, and not, I want to make a point, but she'll do it her way. So when they decided to study whatever they study, Sarah, she decided to go international. So she did her undergrad in Southampton University, and then master's in Vienna, and PhD in Dublin, where she's now working at the Trinity College. And I think she just became the head of the department, students' mental health.
Wow.
So really doing great. And Isidora, again, following her sister's steps, ended up in Prague in Czech Republic, studying medicine. And she met lovely boyfriend of hers, Killian, Irish guy, and they both moved to Ireland and they got the residency.
Wow.
Very different system. They applied in Canada too. To this day, they never received the response from Canadian Medical Council.
Oh, wow.
But in Ireland, they're already finishing the first year of a residency. So by a fluke, they both in Dublin now.
Oh, good. So, I mean, it's amazing. These are challenging times that you went through, Budimka. Challenging for a family to make it through all of these intact and together and everybody thriving. I remember another story, another Isadora story. Jerry, sorry, there's a connection here, but another Isadora story. I recall Mladen and Budimka telling how Isadora had come back from kindergarten, threw her bag on the floor and said, why am I the only kid in school with one family? Because everybody else had come from broken homes. She said, why am I the only one with one set of parents? But it's wonderful that the family has stayed together and thrived, and the kids have thrived. Budimka, your journey is impressive. It's incredible for us to listen to. What's next? What does the future hold? You've got kids in Europe. You and Mladen are in Ottawa. What does the future look like for you now?
We certainly want to get closer to kids, and how, don't know. What's next? Retirement. Ask Mladen. Retirement number one, and then nothing after that. So thinking about retiring, or for me, probably some kind of a semi-retiring next few years. So we'll see. The COVID-19 stopped everyone, including us. So we are just waiting for a time when we can make decision. For now, we'll hold off. But one of the options is PEI.
Wow. Well, that's great. Well, I can tell you Atlantic Canada would certainly love to have you guys. And not only because of your professions, but because of the complexity of your personalities and the layers that you bring. And we would certainly be better for it. Jerry, what are your thoughts? Can you sell Newfoundland quickly?
Well, when I think back on my university days and being exposed to immigrants, my sister married a young man from Kenya. So what you, Budimka, and your husband, and what my brother-in-law have brought to my life is nothing but richness. I wish everybody that was born in Canada would actually think this way. Unfortunately, they don't, but that's another story. I got a quick question that's on my mind, and I gotta ask it. Your story is incredible. those that you love that remained, I'd like you to just touch on that. How did they do? How are they doing? If you could just touch on that a little bit.
Well, thank you for bringing me back. Yes, and I did start talking about, when you have to leave, you actually physically leave, but you bring all those very, very hard ties with you, and you just cannot let go. And especially in our case, the family stayed in the middle of the war in Sarajevo, even worse. And
Wow.
I remember the time when any phone ring after 8 o'clock p.m., I could not answer. I did not want to even pick up that, because in my mind because of a time difference, in my mind that could be only bad news. So yeah, as I said at the beginning, my youngest sister was with us, and she gained the London immigrant visa, same, but decided to go back to visit family in '97, visit mom and dad. Now, coming as a teenager, 15 years old, without parents, after 5 years, she's going back to see them very first time. And after a few months, I got a phone call from her saying, well, I decided to stay. And, it was very hard for me. She was my only lean on, beside, not my own, mine and my husband's, same. She decided to be, and I understand, that's not only instinct, that's the way she wanted to be closer to family. And now my family is another two sisters, and at that time my dad was alive and mom. They remained in the war all the way and stayed after the peace was signed. Life was difficult by any means, because of, again, now all those religions and differences that we were okay with before the war, now we're huge borders between people, between neighboring houses, the not only hatred, but frustration. And then economically, nobody worked for 5 years, no paycheck for 5 years. I don't know even how the life went on, but it did. So the youngest sister who stayed there, she's happily married now after graduating from English language and literacy. I think that was the other two sisters also land a job soon, late 90s, married with kids. My dad died, and my mom is still kicking strong. So yeah, and you know what? Maybe in some way that's the most powerful thing I had all this time, is knowing that I have someone to go to call, to talk to. Not that I didn't have someone here, no, but it's a completely different level of support that we have.
So Budimka, now let's go back to the 3rd of April, 1992. Young mom, baby in your arms, leaving home. What would you say to that person right now?
That person has to leave the home?
Yep.
Okay. You know what? I was thinking about this, but I'm gonna have to say again, live in the presence, live in the moment, even if that moment is as hard as possibly can be, that you don't know if you're gonna survive the trip. Even if it's hard, you don't know what you're gonna find in a new place. But to get there, you have to live in the present, in the moment. You have to get there. Very often we think about a future, but we forget that each day we live leads to that future. The future is made of a days now. Right. That's what I would say. Just live and don't plan too much. We as an immigrant, we mentioned that previously, we had to plan, we have to survive, you never focus on today, because there is some goal, maybe next month or next year, and that's what we missed. And we missed it for a long time. Maybe we kind of, in last few years since kids are fine and grown up, and we're trying to focus on today, on presence. But we missed that for a good 20 years.
Right.
So live in the presence, live today to reach the future you think you may reach to.
Jerry, there's themes coming out of all of our guests, and the theme, well, I'll let you speak to it. Go ahead.
Yeah, Budimka, thank you very much for being a guest on this fledgling little podcast that we have. Living in the moment. I personally have been 30 years running in business, trying to stay ahead. And then 8-9 months ago, stopped. When I hear you talk about for 5 years where you came from, no one had a job, no one worked. Wow. I guess my question is, you kind of touched on it there a minute ago, but what should we be thankful for? That's what I'd like to get out of this today, because anyone who's listening to this, I think you definitely have that perspective.
Freedom of all levels. I had a grandma who died beginning of this last war, and she, as a grandma, would always tell us, kids, God's willing to have a freedom. And we would always say, well, what's the freedom? We lived in the freedom at that time, like what? What do you mean? Why you don't wish us something else, success and boyfriend and whatever? And she said, nope, as long as you have a freedom, you'll have everything else. Wow. So I think we need to be thankful for freedom on different levels, not only war and peace, but also freedom of to do what we want to do, to our decision to go a long way. Because when you don't have a decision that goes long way, you're stuck.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, another episode of Gale Force Winds, and what a fantastic one it was. We got to take our journey from Sarajevo through Canada, meet some amazing people along the way. Budimka, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. We are excited to speak to the rest of this family through the fullness of this year of podcasts and get different perspectives on things. But certainly I can tell that they're all rooted in a very, very solid foundation, what you have displayed here today. I've had the pleasure of meeting Budimka's extended family, and what wonderful people they really are. I'll leave this podcast with one small thing, and that is, the world needs more Budimka Oroz. Thank you, Budimka.
And Jerry, just to say one thing, positive thing, and something that we are blessed with, it's to meet a few people in this country. One of them, certainly Alan Dale and Janet Baker, to become our extended family, friends. I'm emotional, but that's what counts. You know what? You can go through the hardship, but some positive people and things, and that's a blessing. And
we've had some good humor along the way.
I can't imagine that, Alan Dale.
Yeah.
Budimka, absolute pleasure. I cannot wait to meet the rest of your family. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jerry. Have a good day.
Fala Puna.
You're welcome.
Thank you for tuning in to Gale Force Winds. That's Gale Force Winds, WINS.com.